All right, welcome back to the Bookley podcast. It's been a good weekend for anybody who's been following along with the podcast. This weekend, we kind of had our first glimpse of, I don't want to quite call it going viral, but it was definitely the most watched video that we've had so far. And it was on YouTube. And so for anybody who just listens to the podcast or watches it on Spotify, then tune into our YouTube channel because I'm starting to release some other videos that are just like short clips. I'm trying to do one for every episode. So, and they're not necessarily short reviews, but they're just another way to look at the book of that week. So, this last week was the Gulag Archipelago. And the video that was released on YouTube was about, whether or not we should give communism another try and kind of the lessons learned from the Gulag Archipelago. So that video did really well. I mean, it was a little bit controversial and I kind of thought that it would stir some people up, but it over the weekend got, I think like over 2,000 views, I think. So it's our first one to break 1,000 and it crushed through that, went to 2,000. And we got a bunch of new subscribers from it. And so if you haven't checked it out, definitely check out the YouTube page. And it definitely was controversial. It did exactly what I was kind of hoping it would and stirred some people up. I was actually kind of surprised with how many people said that they were still in favor of trying communism again. I'd be willing to say that it was probably a 60-40 split, maybe 70-30 split, 70-30, 70% of people saying, no, there's no way that we should try it again. And then about a 30% split of people who were like, no, we should definitely give this a try again. It's the only way, this is the future. America needs to embrace this wholeheartedly. Like I was actually kind of shocked with still how many people were all in on the idea of communism. And so the comment section in that video went nuts. I think right now we're sitting at like 120 something, maybe 130 comments of people going back and forth, debating on communism and all that kind of stuff. So it was a pretty interesting video. The comments get a little spicy here and there, but it was kind of fun. And I think I'm going to start doing those shorter videos for every single episode of the podcast. So if you do only follow us on Apple or Spotify, make sure that every once in a while you tune back into the YouTube channel because I'm trying to use that as a way to promote the podcast a little bit. There's a little bit more distribution built in with YouTube. And so I just thought, might be a good way to get the name out there. And it's been good. So definitely keep an eye out for that. I might try some other just like one-off videos and see what we can do. So if you're trying to keep up with the Bookley podcast, keep up with progress, definitely the two places that I would say post the most content are going to be Instagram and YouTube. So definitely take a look for us on both of those platforms. And if you are only on YouTube, definitely take a look at our Instagram because we, do book giveaways. We do, questionnaires and, polls and things like that for upcoming books. So definitely keep updated with that. But I thought that was kind of fun. A little win this week for the Bookley podcast, which is good because I don't know if anybody else has tried to do content creation before, but this is kind of a slog. Like it's definitely one of the harder things that I've done in my life. And I question it all the time. I'm always like, what the heck am I doing? Am I providing any actual value? Is this fun for anybody? And so to be able to see, things kind of trend upwards a little bit is always nice. And, I'm still learning throughout this whole process. I think that's probably been the most fun thing is one, learning from reading, keeps me on a timetable, but also just learning all about content creation, video editing. It's been really, really fun. So I am still enjoying it. I do plan on keeping the Bookley podcast going. So far, we'll see how long that actually ends up going. But for right now, there is no end in sight. So I'm excited. Things are looking up. So I thought I'd just mention that here at the beginning of the podcast for anybody who didn't check it over the weekend, because I woke up today to quite a surprise and it was kind of fun. So thank you for that. And this week's book, then just kind of starting to dive right in. I won't bore anybody else with any other business end of the podcast, but this week's book is No Country for Old Men. And I was a little apprehensive with this book because, so originally when I made my book list for 2024, I was just throwing books on there. I had a huge list of probably 150 books that I want to read at some point in my life. That list is continuing to grow. More and more people keep giving me suggestions. You need to add this book. You need to add this book. But at the time, at the beginning or the end of 2023, it was about 150 books long. And so I was just throwing books up there. And a lot of the books that I threw up there, I just had heard things about, or there was a movie made about them and I knew it was a popular movie or something like that. And so I wanted to just read books that I felt like were popular. And I actually had no idea, but when I made the list, that The Road and No Country for Old Men were both written by Cormac McCarthy. I didn't know who the authors were. I didn't look it up. I didn't do that much research on all the books that I chose. I just chose books that either lots of people recommended to me or books that sounded important. I don't know. I honestly, the selection criteria was pretty minimal. So I just was throwing books up on the list and I was like, I'm going to read all these books. And had I known that they were written by the same person, I probably would not have put them so close because The Road was 2 weeks ago. And also having known that, I probably only would have picked one of his books for the year. And it definitely would have been The Road because of, winning a Pulitzer Prize, how critically acclaimed it is, controversial it is. The Road was kind of the book that I would have picked. And I would have been a little bit disappointed because anybody who's watched or listened to my episode of The Road knows it wasn't my favorite book. Now, I didn't absolutely despise that book like a lot of people, but it definitely wasn't my favorite. I mean, I think I gave it a 2.5, or a 2-star. I think I gave it 2 stars overall as far as a ranking goes, 2 out of 5. Like, it wasn't my favorite book, but it wasn't a 1-star book. And I would have just thought that that's all of Cormac McCarthy. And I was wrong because No Country for Old Men was so good. And I don't think, when I say so good, I don't think it was, one of my favorite books that I've ever read. I don't think it was, my favorite book of 2024 yet or anything like that. But I actually really, really, really enjoyed it. Like, I now kind of get why people like Cormac McCarthy. I don't get why people still like The Road. Don't get it at all. But as far as Cormac McCarthy, if more of his books are like No Country for Old Men, then I understand why people really enjoy him, because I really enjoyed No Country for Old Men. And I'm excited to watch the movie because I have never seen the movie and I'm going to watch it this week. I've heard that it's very true to the book. And Javier Bardem is apparently like the best Anton Chigurh, and I'm just super excited for that. But getting started, I do want to read the episode description. So for everybody or anybody who doesn't know what No Country for Old Men is about, if you haven't seen the movie, if you have no idea, that was me about 2 weeks ago. Had no idea what this book was about. I could not have told you one thing about it. I had never seen the movie, had never even looked into it. But had I read the description of the book, I could have told you in advance that I was going to love this movie or love this book because it has basically everything that I like in a good book and a good story in the description. So I could have told you pretty easily that this was going to be a book that I really enjoyed. So here's the description of the book. So the setting is the Texas-Mexico border. The time is our own when rustlers have given way to the drug runners and small towns have become free fire zones. A good old boy named Llewellyn Moss finds a pickup truck surrounded by dead men. A load of heroin and $2 million in cash are still in the back. When Moss takes the money and sets off a chain of reaction that not even the law can contain, encompassing themes as ancient as the Bible and as bloodily contemporary as the morning's headline. No Country for Old Men is a triumph. Okay, so for those of you who didn't get that, again, my reading is terrible. One of these days, by like episode 800, I'm going to be able to read out loud at like better than a third grader level. I promise. It's going to get better. It's just reading out loud. I can read normal. I mean, for anybody who maybe doesn't believe me, I can read. But reading out loud, I hate that. So for anybody who didn't get exactly what it's from, essentially, and I'll say right off the bat, one of the things that I don't love about Cormac McCarthy is that he just gets going right from the start of the book. Now, I understand that you kind of want to hook and you want to grab your readers and start off kind of at a decent pace so that, you're not spending too much time setting up the scene, because if you spend too much time setting up a scene, you can lose readers pretty easily, or people are disinterested. I think that that's true with reading. I don't know. I know it's true with like podcasting and YouTube videos. I mean, with any content creation, and, writing is probably one of the oldest forms of content creation. You do need to hook people in early. And so I get that. I get that that's like a strategy. However, a little bit of setup goes a long way, because I feel like Cormac McCarthy just jumps right into it, and it makes for like a confusing first 10, 15 pages. And I had to go back quite a bit in the very beginning, because I was like, what the heck is going on? Who is this person? Like, why are there just dead people everywhere? But essentially the book starts off with a hunter, Llewellyn Moss, stumbling across a car surrounded with dead bodies, riddled with bullets, and machine guns lying on the ground. And when I say the book started off like that, I mean, it literally starts off with him hunting. I don't know if it was like pronghorn or deer or whatnot, but hunting in, border town, Texas, Mexico, Texas border, hunting in that area. And this Llewellyn just happens upon a car surrounded by dead bodies instantly within the start of this book. So it's a little confusing, because you're like, what the heck? Why are there dead bodies everywhere? Like, what's going on? It doesn't describe who, Llewellyn Moss is. It doesn't describe literally anything. You kind of have to just pick up the pieces as you're going. It's a little bit frustrating, and I kind of had to go back and forth quite a bit. However, once the story is established, it's not a problem. So once you kind of understand what's going on, then the story just clips along at a pretty good pace. Like, there's never really a dull moment in this book. It just starts though right into it. Like, I just want a little bit of an intro, a little bit more information, backstory. I don't know, something. That was my biggest, probably my biggest gripe about this whole book, was the very beginning. But after that, so Llewellyn Moss stumbles across his car surrounded by dead bodies, and he, goes rummaging around in the car, as one would do with machine guns and dead bodies around. And he finds a boatload of heroin and a briefcase with $2.4 million, I think, in it. I think is what it, I don't quote me on that, but I want to say it's $2.4 million in this briefcase. And he decides to take the money, and essentially everything goes downhill from there. He is on the radar for the police as a suspect at first, and then, kind of not as a suspect later when they find out that he's not really that bad of a guy. And then essentially there's a hitman and other cartels and other, mercenaries that are all chasing him, trying to get this money back. And that sets off a chain of just constant murders throughout this entire book, eventually leading to the main character Llewellyn being murdered, as well as, lots of other characters throughout this book. So that's essentially what the book is. And so for anybody who knows me, knows that this has everything in it that I could have wanted. When I was originally a non-literate individual, is the way that I would put it, meaning that I didn't read at all. And when I say that I didn't read at all, I literally mean I didn't read at all. So there was a period in my life from, I don't know, I think it was middle school. I think the last book that I had read was middle school. I want to say, because I was homeschooled in middle school, and my mom claims that she made us read all of the time when we were in middle school. She said we read tons of books. I really only remember one book from middle school, and that was Endurance, the story about Ernest Shackleton, which I do want to reread because I do remember loving that book in middle school. However, that's the last book that I remember like distinctively reading ever before about 3 years ago. So, and I'm 30 years old, so till I was 27. And a lot of people are probably asking, like, how did you not read and get through high school and graduate from college? SparkNotes is pretty great. I don't know how much how much time people have spent on SparkNotes, but it does a pretty good job of outlining everything that you need to know to write an essay in high school, especially, public education in high school. So I was only homeschooled through middle school and then went to public school in high school. And high school was pretty much a joke. and you can write whatever you want, and they're just going to push you through that system of high school. And it doesn't matter what you put down. You just have to put down something generally relevant and then make some sort of claim that's like slightly wild, and then back up your claim. And then that's it, and then that's all the teacher's looking for. They're looking for you to be able to structure an essay, make a point, and then prove your point. And that's it. I mean, as long as you know how to play the game of high school is super, super easy. So essentially that's what I did. I never read any books ever. And like, I literally mean that. I did not read one book in all of high school, all of college until I was 27. And then when I was 27, I started listening to podcasts. So I started listening to, obviously everybody starts with Joe Rogan. I started listening to Lex Friedman. I started listening to a lot of these podcasters. And the one thing that they all have in common, outside of being like good storytellers, was that they all read books. And I was like, you know what? There might be something to that. And so I picked a book and I was like, this is going to be the first book that I read in 15 years. And the first book that I chose was Narconomics, a study of the drug cartels based on like economic theory. I was also an economics major in college, so the idea of economics really interested me. And then, drugs. So I grew up basically every night. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but anybody who knows my family knows that my dad controlled the television every single night growing up. And we watched just about every episode on the Discovery Channel of Drugs, Inc., Locked Up Abroad, Trafficked. I don't know. There was this slew. There's one about gangs. I can't remember what it was called, but essentially it was all these like, I don't know, Discovery Channel things that were meant to give you nightmares. This is what I grew up on. I grew up watching tons of shows on drug cartels and illegal stuff and prison. And so it's always really, really interested me. Like the entire kind of seedy underbelly of the world has always really, really interested me. So the first thing that got me into reading was actually this book called Narconomics. And then I finished it and I was like, holy cow, reading is not half bad. Like that was my introduction. And then I started reading more and more books. I started getting into, slowly getting into fiction books and nonfiction books and, just expanding my horizons of reading. But it all started with a book on drugs. And so when I read the description of this book, that it was basically a book about cartels murdering people over a botched drug delivery, I was like, you know what? Maybe Cormac McCarthy might be for me. So I knew that I was going to like this book from the very beginning. Even my wife, when I was like, oh, I'm going to read No Country for Old Men, she was like, oh, you're going to love that book. And I didn't know why she said that, but I talked to her yesterday and she was like, yeah, I knew you were going to love that book. It's about drugs. And I was like, yeah, no, I mean, that really does interest me. I don't know why. At one point, a couple of years ago, I think it was like 2 years ago. I applied for the DEA and I got through like the first 2 rounds, I think, or something like that, and got to a certain point, but then, decided that after talking to a recruiter for a bit and, going through this process, I decided that, family life and everything like that, it was going to be really hard to do something like that. And I had already been kind of an entrepreneur for about 4 years and had a very flexible family life, a very flexible schedule. I had been, working for myself for about 4 years now. And so it was a little bit hard for me to give up kind of the flexibility and the freedom that comes with being an entrepreneur. But I was seriously considering giving all of that up to work for the DEA. I mean, that's how much this stuff like really interests me. I applied, I went through the whole process. I definitely was close. That's the closest I've ever been to actually giving up my life as an entrepreneur, was just to work for the DEA. So this stuff like really does interest me quite a bit. And so because of that, I really did like this book. I thought it was really, really well done. Again, if anybody hasn't watched my episode about The Road, then you definitely go back and watch it. Helps me. But if you haven't watched it and you don't know anything about Cormac McCarthy, his writing style is rough. And a lot of people are turned off because of his writing style. I was going through and I was reading again some more of the reviews of this book, and a lot of people again said the same thing. Doesn't use punctuation. I have no idea who's talking because he doesn't attribute anything to any of the characters. He just lists out conversations. And then on top of that, you also, he doesn't use barely any punctuation whatsoever, no commas. He uses the word and a ton and just basically squishes sentences together and uses and. And so a lot of people are really turned off by that. However, if you can get past that, past the writing style, the story of No Country for Old Men is significantly better than the story of The Road, in my opinion, because The Road is very repetitive and very slow. So although the inter-character relationship in The Road is phenomenal between the father and the son, and that's what The Road is that relationship, the story doesn't really do a whole lot. I mean, at the very beginning of the story, they're scavenging for food, and by the very end, they're still scavenging for food. Like, nothing really happens in The Road. In this book, the story just clips along at like a crazy pace. Like, once they find the money and the drugs, which is really early in the book, because again, there is no setup, it is basically nonstop people getting murdered, people, chasing after each other, people getting hit by cars, people, ending up in the hospital, sewing up their own wounds. I mean, it's just nonstop action for the entire book, which makes it really, really different than The Road, and in my opinion, a lot better. Now, the characters I don't think are as well developed maybe as The Road. I don't think you kind of feel the same. I mean, I personally, I guess I didn't feel the same connection to the characters in No Country for Old Men that I felt with the characters from The Road. The father and the son from The Road, I mean, you really do feel that connection to those characters, whereas in No Country for Old Men, they're more or less just characters in a story, except for Anton Chigurh. Now, Anton Chigurh is the main antagonist of the story. He is essentially like a hitman, and I've never seen the movie, so I know that Javier Bardem plays him in the movie. And in the movie, so I'm sure that's what I would picture in my mind if I had ever seen the movie, and I'm going to watch it this week. But in my mind, what I pictured was, I can't remember his name. I'm going to be really embarrassed here. I should have looked him up. But if anybody's ever seen Sicario, the guy, the Sicario in Sicario, the assassin in Sicario, that's what I imagined the entire time throughout reading this book. Like, he was a bad dude. Like, he was, as far as villains in books go, I mean, the gold standard for villains for me is always Big Brother from 1984. I think that's the greatest book villain of all time. However, Anton Chigurh is up there. Like, honestly, as far as developing a character that's just so ruthless, but also almost predictably ruthless, and you understand, I don't know. I honestly can't put it into words, but Chigurh is, I mean, he's awesome in the worst ways possible. Like, he is such a uniquely evil, but also slightly understandable character that, I mean, he really does make this book. Like, I know the story is great and the story is very well set up and, everything goes, but really, truly, if I had to boil down this book as to like what I loved about this book, it was obviously the setting. The setting is great. I love the cartels, the money, the drugs. Like, I thought that was really well set up. However, Anton Chigurh is what makes this book phenomenal. Like, so good. And I just thought, I mean, I don't know. And so I would say if Cormac McCarthy in his other books, because I know he writes a lot of, from my understanding, again, he writes a lot of slightly disturbing books. He writes kind of a lot about, I don't know how to put this, because it's not really disturbing topics, but he does write very, almost like graphically is the way that I would put it. So he doesn't doesn't try to make things palatable. Like he writes them almost like hyper realistic, which makes it almost scarier. And so if he's able to create villains like Sugar in all the rest of his books, then I completely understand why people say that he was a phenomenal writer. Now, what I don't understand still is why everybody claims that The Road is his best book ever. I don't know that I'll ever really understand that, because this was so much better, like so much better. I felt like it just moved along so much better. Now, if I had to, going into this book, and again, sorry for jumping around there. I wanted to go back to another point with, I don't understand why The Road won the Pulitzer Prize, because even on Goodreads, and I know Goodreads isn't the end all be all of ratings, but on Goodreads, The Road only has a 3.99. Like it doesn't even crack 4, whereas No Country for Old Men has a 4.15 rating overall. And they both have like a ton of reviews on them. So just in general, more people liked No Country for Old Men than The Road. So if you haven't read The Road and you haven't read No Country for Old Men, maybe you haven't read anything by Cormac McCarthy, but you've heard a bunch of people talk about how great of an author he is, I would recommend not starting off with The Road. Don't start off with The Road. The Road, nah. No, because it's going to give you a bad taste in your mouth. Again, I don't think, had I known that they were the same author, I would have picked both of them. And if I didn't pick both of them, there's no way that I would have read another Cormac McCarthy book next year. I would have just thrown them out. I would have been like, nope, can't do it. Not again. So I'm really actually happy that I read No Country for Old Men, because it kind of reset my palate for Cormac McCarthy. And there's probably a good chance I'll read another one of his books, to be honest, because if they're anything like this, then that's right up my alley. Now, one of the things that people didn't really love about this book was, and I think that this is true for The Road as well, is that Cormac McCarthy doesn't try to create almost an epic story, if that makes sense. A lot of books and a lot of movies and a lot of just entertainment in general kind of follow, I don't know if it's technically called like the hero's journey or whatever, but essentially, you've got somebody who is kind of building up towards something, and then obviously there's the fall that happens a little bit, and this is pretty predictable in most movies and most books. You've got a character that you're building up hype for and you really, really like, and then they do something bad, or in kind of romantic books, it's a relationship that's building and then something bad happens in the relationship and you're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? But they always fix it, and they kind of have this peak there that like everything's building up towards like this central point that is kind of like the pinnacle of the whole story. And the entire movie and or book kind of moves towards that battle, that conversation, that transformation, or that, restoration of, a relationship or whatever it may be. But a lot of stories, that's kind of the structure of those stories. And I think one of the criticisms of Cormac McCarthy is that he doesn't really try to stick to that at all. Because I know in this book, there were a lot of people that were upset that the main protagonist, I actually don't even know if you could call him the main protagonist. I feel like there's two main protagonists in this book. There's Llewellyn Moss, who is the man who finds the money and drugs. And then there's the sheriff, which I hope that I can find his name real quick. I might not be able to. So I want to say it's Bill, but I know it's not, which is going to drive me nuts. Oh, well, the sheriff of the town. And so you've got these two main protagonists, but the entire book feels like it's almost building up in that same pattern to this showdown between Llewellyn and Sugar, right? There are moments, early on setting up Llewellyn as like this slightly higher moral character, somebody who's just trying to make it in this world. He's trying to protect him and his wife. Then there's kind of like this little bit of slip here where they have a little bit of a scuffle. He gets injured. And then, he's starting to get better, and he's on the road to go meet with his wife and make things better. And he's kind of on this uphill trend. And then it's almost, I've heard two different sides of the story, but it's almost too hyper realistic. And then he just skips over kind of that peak of the book. And the peak of the book theoretically could have been this showdown between Chigurh and Llewellyn. However, spoiler, instead what happens is Llewellyn is sleeping in a motel, and the next thing you know, he goes to bed, the scene ends, and the next scene starts up with police officers in the motel looking at his dead body, and apparently a group of mercenaries or assassins from the cartel or the gang or whatever it is, the drug runners, murdered, like a different group that had been tracking him, just murdered him in the middle of the night and left. And so that is like, it almost feels anticlimactic. Like, you spend this entire book following these two characters, Chigurh and Llewellyn, and on all of their actions, and then they don't even meet up as that kind of pinnacle moment of the book. Instead, Llewellyn is just murdered by random people, and that's the end of Llewellyn. Like, that's the end of Llewellyn Moss right there. And so I know that there are a lot of people that felt like that was, again, anticlimactic is the word that I would use. However, there's another group of people, after, reading and doing some critical thinking of my own, who kind of just attribute that to being almost hyper realistic, that in real life, the likelihood chance of somebody tracking you down again and murdering you is just not very realistic. But the idea of just another random act of violence being committed because of the degrading society, then it's much more realistic. Like, there are just lots of just acts of violence throughout this book. And I thought that was, I don't know. I don't know which side of the camp I end up on. I know that when it happened in the book, I had to go back 3 times and be like, okay, did I miss something? Did I miss a part of the book? You almost feel like you missed something, because Llewellyn goes to bed, and then the next page, he's just dead. And you're like, is there a page missing in this book? Did I miss anything? And so that's kind of how I felt in it. However, when I finished the book, I kind of appreciated it a little bit more than I thought I would. And the reason why I appreciated it was because of this kind of concept that was prevalent throughout the entire book, that also is kind of the name of the book, No Country for Old Men. So at some point in the book, I definitely expected them to say the words, "This is no country for old men," just kind of like a punchline. Didn't say it once. And the name for this book actually comes from a poem by, and I have this written down. It's called Sailing to Byzantine by former Irish poet William Butler Yeats. I don't know. Yeats. To me, that looks like yeet. But that's because I watch way too much TikTok. But I think it's William Butler Yeats is my guess. But it comes from a poem. It's the first line of the poem, Sailing to Byzantine. And it essentially is a poem about how that country is outgrown the old people in that country. And essentially there's no more room for them. It wasn't built for them. It's changed too much. And that they're essentially being they just don't fit in anymore. And so that's kind of a theme throughout this book. And at one point in the book, I know that the other main protagonist, the sheriff, at one point he talks about how there was a survey given out back when he was in high school, I think is what he says, or 40 years ago. He talks about how there was a survey giving out about everybody's biggest concerns while going to high school. And some of the concerns were I can't even remember what he said, but it was essentially needing textbooks, or or like bullying or, health concerns, getting a cold. I don't know. They were pretty mild concerns, essentially. But that when this book takes place, which is 1980, that this book takes place, that there was a recent survey in the same exact high school given to the same exact age group of individuals, given about what their biggest concerns were in high school, and their concerns had changed to, suicide, murder, drugs, rape, and, a lot of just much more intense crimes than the original survey had given. And so the sheriff basically says that he doesn't belong, or he doesn't feel like he belongs in this world anymore, because this world is essentially going down the toilet and pushing old people like him out. Like it just chews you up and spits you out, because you weren't made for this time when there was so much evil or so much wrongdoing in there. And I may be misinterpreting that a bit. So if I am, definitely leave a comment down there in the description. But essentially, that's kind of the idea behind this book, is that there's this character. Again, there's two main protagonists in this book. There's the Llewellyn, who finds the money and initiates the initial conflict between the cartels and law enforcement. And then there's the embodiment of, I guess, law enforcement itself, or the embodiment of kind of an older generation, which is with the sheriff. And I really should find his name, but the sheriff. And because, well, and so the story is basically like a contrast of this old time individual who the entire book is saying, like, this never would have happened back in my day. This never would have happened back in my day. And all of the violence that's being brought into the country due to drugs, due to, just in general crime, cartels, and all of this stuff. And it's this kind of look at how it's just not the same anymore. And it's like this older demographic of people. I don't really know how to describe it. I feel like it's almost a feeling within the book that you have to get, because there's no one paragraph in the book that I could read, or one quote from the book that I could read that would give you this feeling. But ultimately it's kind of this, this feeling of, back in my day, we never had any of that, like you hear that all the time, or this world's going to hell in a handbasket. That's kind of like the prevailing idea of this book. And it's kind of embodied between this character who doesn't really know where he belongs in the story, because he's still trying to fight against this evil, but also feels like, this sheriff who feels like it's a losing battle that doesn't matter anymore, because there are just bodies lining up all over his county. There's initially all of those 8 murders with the cars, but then there's a deputy that gets murdered. There's there's a group of Mexicans that get murdered outside of a hotel. There's, random murders throughout the book. There's a car crash that kills 3 teens. And he basically is just saying, like, again, it's this idea that, this country's going to hell in a handbasket, and he feels lost as a kind of this old man who knew how great the country was, but also feels like he can't do anything to change that trajectory. He feels like he although he's sheriff of this town, he feels like it doesn't matter. Nothing that he does is going to make a difference. And it's almost, and this change and this influx of crime and everything like that is inevitable. And that the country just is moving along without him, and that he can't do anything about it. And so that's kind of the idea of this book. And that's the idea of this book from my perspective. There may be others that have a different perspective in it, but I thought that was very well done, because I think that that's a pretty common sentiment between, really anybody that looks back in time. And I think that there's a little bit of I don't know, a little bit of recency bias or a little bit of, I don't know, perspective that goes into that. Because I mean, I even do that personally. If I think back on, my time as a teenager, I'm like, man, it was so much better back then. I mean, we're talking 15 years. I'm like, it was just so much better to be a teenager back then. I mean, we didn't have smartphones and TikTok and all this stuff ruining our day. But I mean, if you were 30 years older than me, you'd look back at your teenage years and be like, oh, it was so much better than the, late 90s, early 2000s. We didn't have television in every home, or, we were outside riding our bikes. And, everybody always looks back at their time as kind of better than things are now. And that there's just like this downward trajectory of society. And that things are just getting worse. And you always look at it and you're like, things are just getting worse. Like, I think there's a very pessimistic attitude out there. And I think that's what this book was. It was kind of a very pessimistic outlook towards the rising crime rates due to drugs and due to just an increase in violence at the border. And it was just a very early look at what that looks like. And so in some regards, it had a very similar feeling to The Road, because I know in The Road, a lot of people claim, or a lot of people say that there was one comment on my YouTube channel this last week from an individual who commented on my video about The Road. And he said that The Road is his second of all time favorite book behind Moby Dick. So his number one favorite book is Moby Dick. The second favorite book that he's ever read was The Road. And the reason why he said that he loved The Road so much was because of the feeling that he got while reading it, because he felt like it was extremely bleak and terrifying, and that came across through the writing very, very well. Now, I would say that in this book, the feeling that Cormac McCarthy is able to bring across is almost the inevitability of this downfall of society. And he brings it across very well. I mean, again, most books kind of have that upswing at the very end, that peak, that pinnacle, that overcoming of some sort of, great obstacle that makes for almost that happy, warm, fuzzy feeling. And I would say even in sad books, there's even that kind of like that light at the end of the tunnel, that almost that peak of like warm, fuzzy feeling. Like the book that I kind of first comes to mind is The Book Thief, because again, it was one of my favorite books of 2024. But in The Book Thief, it's pretty, I don't want to say miserable, but it's pretty, the end of that book is pretty devastating. I mean, it takes place in World War II. Obviously, a lot of people know what happened in World War II. There's just a lot of destruction. However, at the end of the book, there is still that kind of upswing, that triumph of the character Leslie, and her ability to kind of overcome and transcend the awfulness that happened at the very end of everybody else dying in that book. So there's still kind of that upswing. This book doesn't have any upswing whatsoever. I mean, if you want to talk about a book that just ends with you feeling that kind of inevitability of like cultural decay, that's what this book feels like at the end. The bad character, Sugar, never caught. The bad people get their money back. Basically, everybody good dies except for the sheriff, and the sheriff just retires after going on a monologue saying that nothing that he does ever really can make a dent into this, and so he doesn't know why he's still trying. And that's how the book ends. And so I feel like, again, one of the great things about Cormac McCarthy is his ability to write stories that make you feel the way that he wants to make you feel. I know that sounds a little bit, I don't know, circular maybe, that obviously, writers want to make you feel a very certain way. However, I feel like a lot of writers maybe miss the mark. They try to make you feel scared, and maybe it doesn't actually make you feel scared, or they try to, build, I don't know. I think a lot of writers can make you feel a certain way by attaching you to characters. And I think that's a very useful skill. However, I think Cormac McCarthy is able to make you feel a certain way simply by the way he writes. And I think that is a very unique skill that I have seen so far within my reading journey. Again, I haven't read a whole lot. I'm not trying to come out there as like this literary genius or anything. I'm still very early. I've read, 1 year ago, you could probably count on two hands the amount of books that I've read in my entire life. So I'm not trying to say that I'm, very far along my literary journey, but what I will say is that out of the books that I've read in the past year, which has probably been about 50 books in the past year, Cormac McCarthy kind of stands above the rest in his ability to really make you feel a certain, like at the end of the book, he knows how he wants you to feel, and he makes you feel it with this story. The Road, he made you feel hopeless. He made you feel miserable. He made you feel monotonous. And he did that through his writing the entire book. And it made for a very unenjoyable and boring book, but he did accomplish that. Like, he made you feel a certain way. In this book, he does make you feel like almost like the world is inevitably going to hell in a handbasket, and there's nothing that you can do, nothing that any of the characters can do. And so he does that very, very well. And so I will admit that I am slowly becoming a Cormac McCarthy fan, and I will attribute some of that to the fact that most of The Road I listened to. I did read a small section, and same with No Country for Old Men. Most of it I listened to. I did read a small section. Again, I'm just trying to get a feel for what people complain about, because people complain about his writing style. And I will say that I think I like Cormac McCarthy because I listened to his books. If I had read them, I'd hate him. I hate the no punctuation. I hate the no quotation marks. You never know when a character's done talking and when the next character is talking. Nothing's attributed to them. I hate all of that. I hate just the running page of nonsense. So I think I attribute a lot of why I like Cormac McCarthy and why I liked this book to the fact that I listened to it on audiobook. So if you struggled with The Road, so if you haven't read any of his books, read No Country for Old Men first. And if you struggled with The Road and you didn't like it because of the punctuation or because of the boring nature of The Road, I'll just go ahead and say it. The Road was boring. It was repetitive. It was monotonous. And I think it was supposed to be, but it was still boring. Then try No Country for Old Men and try listening to it, because I think that listening to it, you'll have a much better experience for it, and I think you'll appreciate him as an author more when you're not so hung up on the fact that he has no idea how to use punctuation whatsoever. So that is my opinion of No Country for Old Men. I really, really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was great, and I'm really excited for the movie, because from everything that I've read, like I said, I think Anton Chigurh is one of my all-time favorite villains in any book. And he's definitely a top 5 for sure. And from what I've heard, Javier Bardem nails it with him. And so I'm very excited to see how he plays Anton Chigurh, because, what a character to be able to play in a movie. Because, again, I thought he was so well done in the movie. And I want to say, if you feel like I spoiled a lot, I did not. So if you haven't read this book, there's still so much in this book that I didn't go over, mostly because I didn't want to spoil the whole thing. And there are, there are pieces and moments of this book that, I don't know, like send chills down your spine and kind of like, again, it just makes you feel, and this is not the right word, because I know this may turn people off from reading this book, but it makes you feel icky in almost a good way. Like it makes you feel kind of the evilness of the character very well. And like the inevitability of kind of death stalking you almost. Like that's kind of what it felt like with. And so it was just very well done. Really, really liked it. So as far as rating this book would go, I would give this book A 4.5 on fun side of things, I'd give it a 4.5 out of 5. I don't think I'm going to give it a perfect score, but I did really enjoy it. 4.5 out of 5. I think it was very, very, very entertaining. The beginning of the book is a little bit confusing. I had to go back a couple times and reread it just to make sure that I didn't miss anything, because it just picks up. And then again, like I said, Llewellyn dying in the motel, again, I had to go back and forth a little bit to pick it up. And so because of that, I would say, there were moments that I wish there was a little bit more backstory to it, a little bit more description to it, because the majority of this book is, this person said this person said this person said this happened, this happened, this happened, this person, this happened, this happened. Like, there's not a lot of setup or description. It's just, just a dialogue or a moving the story along, which has its pros and cons. The story moves along at a very quick pace, which is enjoyable to read. Con, it can be confusing at times, which is why I give it a 4.5 out of 5 for fun. Now, as far as importance goes, I'm going to give this a 3.5 out of 5. 3.5 out of 5, because I do think kind of this country's going to hell in a handbasket, mentality, I think is a very interesting one, because I think it's one that we can all relate to. I think everybody looks pessimistically at the trajectory of anything, the trajectory of humankind, the trajectory of, I just think a lot of people have a pessimistic view of things. And so kind of seeing that play out in this story was very interesting. I also, think that a lot of people have claimed Cormac McCarthy to be one of the greatest authors of our generation. And so because of that, I think it's important to read his works. So just to gain an understanding of who, what he wrote, why people think it was so important, why people think it was influential. So again, just based on who Cormac McCarthy is, I think this is an important book. And culturally, I think it was also very important. No Country for Old Men, I know, won a ton of awards as far as the movie is concerned. So it definitely had a cultural impact on the United States as a whole, whether it came from the book itself or the movie. So again, I think it did have an impact on people. And so I would say 3.5 out of 5 for importance and a 4.5 out of 5 for fun. This is definitely much, 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 much more fun than The Road. So that is my review of and my overall impressions of No Country for Old Men. Hopefully that maybe inspired you to read it a bit, because I don't think nearly as many people have read No Country for Old Men as they have The Road. And which is sad, because if The Road is all that you have to go on for Cormac McCarthy, then that sucks, because The Road sucks. So definitely read No Country for Old Men. It is different than The Road. It is not happy-go-lucky. And like I said, it finishes with this feeling of inevitability of demise, but it at least is a good story along the way, and it just does a very good job. And the villain is incredible. So if you're a fan of like well-constructed villains, then you have to read No Country for Old Men. It was really, really, really well done. All right, and that's all I've got for No Country for Old Men. So make sure to leave us a comment here on just your overall impressions of the book, and whether, actually, I take that back. Leave a comment with your top villains from any book, because I do love a good villain. I think that a good villain can make or break a book, to be completely honest. I think they're just as important as a good protagonist is. Like, a good antagonist in a book is very, very important. So leave me a comment with your top 5 favorite antagonists out of any book. I'll add them to my list, because I do really enjoy a good antagonist. And make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and make sure to turn on notifications so that you don't miss any episodes. If you are listening on Apple or Spotify, leave us a 5-star review, and make sure that you check out our YouTube channel, because we have additional content on there. I'm going to be posting a video, I believe tomorrow, with kind of I think it's going to be like a villainous review of Anton Chigurh, both from the book and from the movie. So hopefully I'll have the movie watched by then, and we'll break down why I think he's such a good bad guy. So definitely tune in for that. I think that'll be fun. And if you are interested in being a guest on the podcast. I think I'm going to make I'm going to go back to making a more concerted effort to try to get guests. I know I put that on the back burner for a bit, but I do think it is a little bit more interesting to have a guest on here. So I'm going to try to do that a little bit more. I'm going to reach out to some people. We're just going to maybe post a video about it, trying to get a little bit more traction about getting guests on the podcast. So if you are interested in being on the podcast, please reach out, follow us on Instagram, send us a DM, let us know, what books you would like to read. Would love to have you on the podcast, and we'll just keep this thing rolling. And thank you, and see you next time. Man, I said "and" a ton of times. I'm turning into Cormac McCarthy myself. Thanks.